So it's particularly relevant for new technologies in which there's not so much experience. I think they're really important on the one hand to be able to create these technologies, but also because they allow you to see some of the ethical issues on a small scale.
So you mentioned living labs and lead users, and these are, would you mind explaining to the listeners, if they don't know what these are, how can we set those things up?
Yeah, so the idea of living lab and lead, and this is particularly relevant in, so for example, for the drone company, this was really particularly relevant. So it's particularly relevant for new technologies in which there's not so much experience. And then a living lab is a kind of environment. It can be a part of society. It can also be literally on a private terrain, but it can also be just in a city. Of course, you need approval then of the city council, but it is just, so what you're actually doing is trying out or experimenting with the technology in a kind of smaller but environment, but this is nevertheless as much as possible like the real world, so to say. So it is not a lab in the sense of a lab where you're doing physical trials. It is a lab where you do, say a trial with using the technology. And it may require what's called lead users, so users that are willing to use this technology before others. And I think this is particularly relevant for technologies that we're not so sure about what are the potential. And actually this is true both of the more commercial potential, but also of the way it will be used, and also about what possible societal and ethical issues these might bring. So this drone technology is a particularly good example, because like I said, regulators didn't want to allow these drones in city centers for, in a sense, understandable reasons. But the company argued, well, the risks are actually not that big, and they're doing a kind of trial, for example, allowing it, if a city would be willing to allow it for a month to operate under certain conditions, also conditions of stopping when something was going to stop the experiment. The company could actually show, okay, this works. Or it could be that they found out, okay, there is this unexpected issue. Now we need to address that. So, and that's of course responsible innovation. So, and this also very much makes clear that responsible innovation is not so much about constraining technology. Exactly in this case, it is very much about allowing the technology to be developed, but do it in a responsible way. And actually, by doing it in this way, you might be, like I said, be able to convince the city council to allow such an experiment. So you have the same thing with autonomous cars. It's different in different countries, but there are several countries that allow some form of experimentation. And this is actually also from technical reasons necessary, because otherwise you cannot improve them enough to make them work. So that's the idea of living labs. And very much the idea to do that in a responsible innovation way. Yeah.
Who's doing it really well?
I think countries like Japan are doing this quite good. I think there's some of it in the Netherlands. I think in the United States there's also, although there people from the responsible innovation might have the idea that it allows a bit too easily allowed, in the sense that so for example you have a whole discussion. So in the US, for example, for quite some time it was allowed to have autonomous cars, and we had for example the accident with an Uber. This wouldn't have been allowed in most European countries. So you might say, in a sense, the US is doing this more. But the critical remark you might make there, it is much more from just the point of view of advocating the technology, and not so. And again, so I'm not saying that I'm not against advocating technology. I'm only saying it should be done in a responsible way. I think this combination you find better in countries like Japan and the EU. I think this is only happening on a small scale, but it's interesting. My university, I'm at Delft University, so we have something that's called the Green Village, It's actually just a small area on our campus. And there they organize living labs. And the interesting thing is that because the area is owned by the university, it is private ground. So that means that some of the rules and regulations don't apply to it. So, for example, the rules and regulations for traffic don't apply at private ground. So it means that so some people also talk about what they call regulatory free zones. So these are zones in which some regulations don't apply. And again, you can do this in an irresponsible way. You're saying, well, but you can also do it in a responsible way. Namely, it might actually be true that some regulation is not a good regulation in view of new technology, and that would actually be more responsible. So, and this is the nice thing about this, what is called Green Village, because in a sense it is also to some extent a regulatory free zone. You can try out things you cannot try out in public space. And I think these kinds of environments, and they should of course be done in a responsible way. We should have some ethical guidelines for them. But I think they're really important, on the one hand, to be able to create these technologies, but also because they allow you to see some of the ethical issues on a small scale. And that has a very big advantage. Because, I mean, you mentioned the case of social media. So we now have all these problems with echo chambers and problems with truths and so on. So there's a lot of issue about social media. And it might be that they couldn't have been foreseen completely beforehand, but it is interesting to think, suppose we had tried out social media on a smaller scale, in a kind of controlled group, maybe we had found some of these issues and we could have addressed them then, and then it would have been much easier to address them than now that, well, all social media has been organized in a certain way. So this is also very much the idea of these living labs, that you can find some of the things you didn't solve of also in an ethical sense quite early on. And this is why I think it is not just an boost for innovation. It's also a boost to do innovation in a responsible way if you organize it properly.
Do you think universities are the ideal places for living labs, given the facility and the environment?
Yeah, to be honest, I think universities are very well placed, because certainly technical universities like my own, because on the one hand they have the connection to companies, to the technology, but they also have very much this broader social function, and they very much, or should have, this interest, and my university has, and I think many, in doing this responsible. So I think universities are very well placed at this crossroads, so to say, between technology, private interest, but also the public interest. Yeah.